have the possibility of dialogue, the possibility of, well, maybe instead of just struggling and fighting over this, and I need to dominate you and impose my values on you, we have a natural interchange and come up with these values. And so it is about power and it is about dialogue. And don't ask me to figure out what is the best formula for all these things, because I'll probably study this for another 1,000 years and still not have a perfect answer.
If we ever, yeah. Well, yeah. So, okay. So where my mind goes as you're saying that is, and you alluded to it, not directly, but you start to get to this realm, which I think is at the root of how a lot of people think about this, of when you talk about power in that way, very quickly my mind starts to think of, the animal kingdom, right? And the whole idea of survival of the fittest. It's a very similar dynamic. We're more sophisticated, we have consciousness, but it's the same dynamics at play, right? If the lion is more powerful in whatever form that is in the jungle, that's just size and strength and power and numbers, perhaps. They have the ability to dictate how that ecosystem functions. And if they want to go kill that gazelle and eat it, they're going to go ahead and do that. Us as humans, very similar. If we have the economic or political or social power and we want to decide this is how society is going to function, we have the ability to go do that. Now, somebody could take that and say, okay, that might suck. And I think I would like to think most reasonable people would say that's not ideal. That doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem the way it should be. But they would have this underpinning of like, but that's just nature. That's just what it is. And what I think is really interesting about what you're saying, particularly with the dialogue point, and I think this as well, is that as we've evolved and our consciousness has evolved, even though we come from nature, in a weird way, we've started to detach ourselves from it. And we should no longer be bound by those limitations that say, well, that's how nature functions and whoever has power just decides, and we'll never get rid of that. You're proposing a world, and others have as well, which says through dialogue, through understanding ourselves and doing that hard work we spoke about before to figure out who authentically I am and you are, we can overcome that. We can figure out a way to where we don't eliminate power dynamics completely, but we diffuse it enough to where we can actually get to a better objective reality as you're positioning it. So let me stop there firstly and say, is that a fair kind of assessment of it, A? And B, to your point, is it realistic? Is that real though? Can we ever actually do that?
A, that is a very realistic assessment. And also related to B is a very realistic assessment of how human society has mostly progressed throughout history. And I do believe in a kind of sense of progress in that through trial and error, we're getting a little bit better, at least at figuring these things out. And I think that there's been this kind of push because, like you say, most people don't want it to be survival of the fittest, lion wants. I mean, obviously, there are some people that do want society, right? But I think most people don't. And so that feeling has been there throughout human history. And so we've kind of been incrementally progressing toward being more open about, yeah, that's what we really want as a society. And so we've made some progress in that area. Is it realistic? Well, this gets back to the discussion you brought up earlier about, well, can we ever have certainty? And if we can't have absolute certainty, well, what, we just don't decide? I obviously we have to continue moving forward, living. We have to figure out how we're going to eat, where we're going to stay warm, all of those daily decisions. And those are long-term decisions too. One of the big crises that we will have as humanity, of course, is the environmental crisis going on right now, which is really going to make bear a lot of these issues of, instead of domination and the lion killing all the gazelles, we have to have some sort of dialogue, we have to have some sort of common decision making. And it's not just a matter of is it realistically possible, it's like, well, what is the alternative? And the alternative is really not terribly good.
No.
We've seen, history has shown us the alternatives over and over again. And maybe someday we'll start listening to what history has shown us, that the opposite of that is really not terribly nice.
Yeah, it gets to, you'll know this better than me because I think you're much more well-read and versed on it, but it starts to make me think a little bit of Nietzsche and the will to power, because it gets to a fundamental question of that gravitational pull towards power. is that just embedded in our beings where we could never turn that off? Because it makes me think, and this is a provocative question, particularly for two white men to ask, but I'll ask it with full sensitivity. Because even in the dynamics you're saying before, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Very rightfully so, and understandably, they're trying to shift that power dynamics, right? And in an ideal way, what they're trying to do is democratize it and say, white men shouldn't have all the power to dictate how society functions. It should be, it should account for everybody. But the concern in that, and it's not a concern on like a literal societal level, it's more on a philosophical level, is when you does any individual or group for that matter actually want the power dynamic to be level? Or is somebody going to, because I think this is what a lot of white men who are not, or white people in general who are against Black Lives Matter or social progress in that way, they may not admit this, but what I fear is that what's implicit in that is they understand that power dynamics don't level out. If I have power now and somebody's saying, well, that's not fair, we should fix it, the fear is it's just going to shift the other way. And they're going to take that power dynamic, and they're humans, and they're going to do the same thing and say, well, I want that power, and they're going to take it. And again, there's a philosophical view which says, yeah, maybe they might do that because that's what humans have done throughout history. Now, maybe that's even well-deserved because white people have had enough time, and we should, right? You can get into all that. But again, do you think about that at all? Like, do you think there's any human that actually wants a fully balanced power dynamic? Or maybe I shouldn't say any human, because maybe individually we can, but at scale, can we get away from that gravitational pull towards having power?